Good evening, and welcome to all of you. This is going to be a very fascinating program. We're very excited to be presenting on Charles Goodman's communities. My name is Karen Anton. I am a member of the Reston Historic Trust Board and chair of the program committee. And I'd like to ask you all, now this is being recorded tonight, our brand new video equipment, so if you wouldn't mind silencing all cell phones and any device that makes noise, I would appreciate it. So I would like to, with great pleasure, introduce you all to our new, as of July, executive director who, she came in July and was thrown immediately to the wolves in the midst of planning for our August cardboard boat regatta, one of our biggest events of the year, and she's still here. It didn't scare her away. So please give a warm welcome to Ms. Lisa Watts.
It was great. That's how we like to do it, just get thrown right in. But good evening, I am Lisa Watts, and I'm proud to be the new executive director here at the Reston Museum, and it is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to the Charles Goodman program. And I want to thank you for joining us. But I also want to give you just a quick note about who we are at the Reston Museum and what we do. The Reston Museum is a community organization that seeks to preserve the past, inform the present, and influence the future of Reston through educational programs, just like this one. Additionally, we support and manage the Reston Museum, located here in Lake Ann Plaza. And as a nonprofit organization, we depend on donations and memberships from the community. And this is where I'm going to reach out to you guys, okay? So on your chairs, you see forms, membership forms, docent forms, if you want to volunteer and help out. And this could be anything. Maybe you want to help out at the cardboard boat regatta. Maybe you have a lot of knowledge, a lot more than me about Reston, and you want to help out on walking tours. Or maybe you just want to help out in the museum and help encourage people as they come in, maybe sell some things from the museum shop. We would really appreciate any capacity at all that you have. If you want to provide a donation, since we are a nonprofit, love that. It helps us, again, do things like this. And I do also want to go ahead and say a quick thank you to Reston Community Center, who graciously provides donations and partners with us regularly so that we can bring these kinds of programs to the public with little to no cost. So we also invite you to attend one of those community events that I was just talking about. So the regatta will be back in August. You guys can see we are advertising our Reston home tour. So if you're interested in tickets, we again highly encourage you, go ahead and get those because early bird pricing is only good until October 3rd. And then Celebrate Reston will be happening on April 5th. This is formally Founders Day. All right, to learn more about us and our upcoming events, please visit our website at restonmuseum.org. Real quickly, also, one of the museum's goals is to engage the public in the exploration of community history, along with collecting, preserving, and interpreting the artifacts and documents of Reston's history. And today, you guys get to be a part of that. So before I introduce our speakers, or I introduce who's our board member who's going to introduce our speakers, I want to encourage you to be inquisitive. Get your notes app out. Go ahead and use one of these papers that you might not fill out and go ahead and take some notes on the back of it, because it's my understanding that we're going to run this maybe a little bit like a discussion. That's highly encouraged. So if you have questions in the middle, let's go ahead and get them out there and see what we can learn tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our board members, Shelley Maestrin, who is going to go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you, Lisa. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers tonight. Mimi Sadler and her husband, Camden Whitehead. God, sorry. They're a team of husband and wife architects based in Richmond. So they've come all the way up from Richmond for this evening. They founded a historic preservation firm, Sadler and Whitehead, back in 1997, which was actually a woman-owned business focused on preservation and adaptive reuse. The firm works on federal tax credit projects, environmental reviews, Section 106 consultations, and historic district overlays. Mimi led the business for 22 years. She is a historical architect who's focused on creatively adapting older buildings and their neighborhoods for new uses. She attended Williams College and the University of Virginia. Notably, for tonight's presentation, Mimi was instrumental in helping Highland Hills, which is a Goodman-designed community in Richmond, achieve Virginia's Test of Time AIA Award in 2023. And I know you have other Goodman credentials as well, which you can tell everybody about. Her husband, architect Camden, is a retired professor of interior design at the School of the Arts at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond. Camden and Mimi have been teaching an architectural appreciation class for the past few years at the Open University, an educational outreach of the Shepherd's Center of Richmond. So you're about to hear from two experts on Charles Goodman. Take it away.
We are thrilled to be here with y'all tonight. Feel free to interrupt us. We recognize you, especially some of you, as great experts on particularly Hickory Cluster. So we are humble and we are ready to receive your questions, corrections, etc. But we're going to talk about Charles Goodman's communities. Charles Goodman was born in 1906 in New York City, died in 1992 in Washington, D.C. He received his architectural degree from the Armour Institute in Chicago, which, thanks to the genius of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, was converted to the Illinois Institute of Technology. After he got his degree, he started his work for the United States government in Washington, where he moved, and began working for the Army Air Force. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Here are some of the buildings or groups of buildings we're going to talk about that were highlights of Goodman's career. First, in 1945, the International Terminal at National Airport, a building that no longer exists, but nevertheless showed us what Charles was going to do in the future. Beginning in 1946, right after he started his own company and was hired by Robert Davenport, he started work on Highland Hills in Alexandria. We're going to talk about Highland Hills in Richmond, Virginia, a community that introduced us to Charles Goodman.
That's not where we met.
That's not where we met, no. And we're also going to talk about the River Park development in Southwest Washington, D.C., developed in 1959 to 63. And finally, the highlight of the whole evening, 1963, Hickory Cluster. We're going.
Mies van der Rohe, who some of you know was the director of the Bauhaus in Dessau, Germany, he came to this country as the Nazis forced people out of Germany and came to Chicago, started working at Armour, which became IIT. We have him here. His time at IIT didn't overlap with Goodman's, but Goodman talked a whole lot about Mies van der Rohe as being influenced by him. And
Goodman's daughter talked about her father handing her books of Mies van der Rohe's work so that she would be inspired by them.
Also at the time, Goodman, born in Chicago, is not going to be unaffected by Frank Lloyd Wright, who was working there. So you got these two modern greats at opposite ends of the architectural spectrum. Wright on one hand doing organic architecture, Mies on the other hand doing a much more rational, systematic approach to architecture. And Goodman ends up as a second generation of both of these guys in a way, sort of bridging that gap. What else was going on at the time? Well, Wright was doing the Zimmerman House in Vermont, and you see this roof that covers the entire house. That's something that you'll see later on at Holland Hills. This notion that it was the gatherer, it was the announcement of shelter, it was sort of this architectonic fundamental aspect of what a house is. You also have Louis Kahn, kind of pretty much in Goodman's generation, but He's working in Philadelphia. This is the Roche House that you see, and just with those windows, you start seeing the menu that Goodman started adapting. Not that he was following what Kahn was doing, but it was happening sort of parallel. Whoops. Also, out on the West Coast, you have the Charles and Ray Eames on the right-hand side, this is one of the case study houses done in 1949. So a year, actually the year Holland Hills was conceived. Charles and Ray Eames, again, second generation modern architects, but in this case, looking at an affordable house. This is a house that they ended up designing for themselves, made of off-the-shelf industrial parts, and so by its nature, systematized. On the left, you see the J. Irwin Miller house that Eero Saarinen did in Columbus, Indiana, and again, a house that's very much wedded to its site, like Holland Hills, and in this case, Saarinen teaming with Dan Kiley, a landscape architect who did work at Holland Hills.
And also at Hickory Cluster.
Yes.
So this combination of great architects. What we wanted to do is to place Goodman in the context of the most famous architects of his time, the people who were his competitors, so to speak, for being well known. But back in reality,
Back in Virginia, back
in the real world, this is what the suburbs were dominated by. Colonial revival, colonial revival houses, simple Cape Cod houses, split levels, sometimes ranchers. This is what most developments look like at the time that Goodman was entering the peak of his career.
And interesting to note that Goodman worked with developers, and at the time, when you think of the greats, they didn't work with developers, right? And so as a result, Goodman was somewhat shunned. I never heard of Goodman when I was in architecture school. Greg Hunt let us know that when Goodman came up as a fellow in the AIA, first time around, he was denied fellowship. Most likely because of, what he was doing was mass production housing. And that was kind of a no-no in the eliteness of architecture.
And this just shows you a comparison of other similar developments, what they were costing. We're just trying to give you a sense of what was the housing being built in the early 50s when Goodman was entering the peak of his career. And we see Arlington Forest, a colonial revival. You could get this house for $10,000. Holland Hills, $12,000. Homes Run Acres, $13,750. And these floor plans that are shown are similar with, combined living and dining rooms, kitchens that were open into those spaces. So these were themes that were in the water, so to speak, when Goodman was working in Holland Hills.
And this was a point when the open plan was just translating into mass-produced housing. Okay, it had been introduced in the early 1900s, but it was just starting to come into mass production, if you will. So here a table that just to place these costs, because when we see a $12,000 house, that's impossible. Well, that was when you look at the cost of housing in Virginia in 1950, $6,500. In DC, $14,000. So it's right in about the average of what houses in the area should cost.
So moving into Goodman's career, now that we've got a little bit of context about cost and what else was being developed at this time, Goodman's first big projects were for the Army Air Force and for airport construction. And this is a project at National Airport that Greg Hunt introduced us at the symposium last weekend. This is the International Airport Air Terminal at National Airport. This building no longer exists, But boy, does this prefigure the work that Goodman did at Holland Hills and other suburban developments, not so much Hickory Cluster, but the very simple roof form, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the modular construction, and also the expansion of interior space by using glass walls, open treads in the stairway, all this to open up space. So you have glass wall interiors and glass on lots of floor-to-ceiling glass at the exterior.
Really starting to look at how to minimize the mullions between the glass. You know, ideally, he probably would have had one giant sheet of glass if that could be done. But, you know, that mullion, which is
Structural.
It's structural, but it's also one of the kind of boogaboo details within architecture.
Holland Hills is born in 1946. You know, in practically the same year that Goodman hangs out his shingle as a private architect with a small firm, which remained small throughout his career, Robert Davenport, a novice developer, invites Goodman to see this huge site that he has acquired in Fairfax County in Alexandria. And Davenport reports, the natural beauty of the land had to be retained. I was an idealist who wanted to build a community. This is a key word. A community I can be proud of. I began my search for the best land planner available. Several sources recommended Charles Goodman. And Goodman goes out with Davenport on this walk, and he says, I started walking through the woods and suddenly noticed we were climbing as we walked, and we reached the top, and there was a broad view of the valley that confronted us. This, said Bob Davenport, is to be Holland Hills, a community of single-family homes. My creative juices began to flow wildly. You know, he was inspired. This was, for a guy who had just opened his office. And Davenport, who's in the middle of this, who knows, developer. That actually says developer. It's not in Spanish or develop. I'm sorry, that didn't translate in the PDF conversion. You know, here we have Goodman on the left, Bob Davenport, Robert Davenport in the middle, the developer. The sales guy was obviously the sales guy, huge smile, bigger than life. And then the builder who built all of Davenport's buildings in Holland Hills at the beginning. So you had the same builder using these unique details developed by Charles Goodman to create Holland Hills, which you see outlined in red on the right.
But I think also to note with the Holland Hills team, it's, you know, very often in architectural projects, these guys are at each other's throats. But in this case, they're all on the same team, and they're all working together, and they're all trying to figure this thing out and essentially make a better house. Because I think Davenport knew a better house is going to sell better. So here we are, this very blocked-in houses here, but you see that none of these houses are parallel to the street, and
the streets are not in a grid. The houses are not parallel to the street. What the hell is going on?
And they're not even set in the site like Alvar Aalto would do. They're set in a way so that they're responding to their neighbor in terms of preventing one house from seeing the neighbor. So one of the genius ideas about this development is this notion that there were no fences and so that preserves sight lines across the land, which means I'm on a small lot, but I'm not hemmed in by my fence. I'm seeing 4, 5, 6 lots away and enlarging my view. So here, early Holland Hills.
This is my slide.
Oh, okay. You see that. I was so excited.
You see,
my creative juices were flowing wild.
Holland Hills, and you see the new landscape obviously popping up behind the houses. You see the houses obviously very cockeyed related to the street. The curving roads that denote a suburban development, and then the forest on the side. which when they were unbuildable, they were reclaimed as parks, which were donated by the developer, Robert Davenport, back to the community, which managed this series of parks within the neighborhood.
So here, a closer view of some of the siting. This a Barney Voigt Barney Voigt site plan. And so, again, you can really start seeing some of the ideas that are happening between the house and the site. The simple house plan, but what you see now in the landscape are these outdoor rooms. Let me see if I can, you see, here's the house. Here are these spaces that are really sort of extensions of the house. Oops.
Oh.
We're both doing it. Okay. So you see these outdoor rooms here, and then you get a more general yard in the back. And what happens is now no fences, but right around the house you get these thicker hedges. But as you get towards the back, those hedges get less dense. Are you doing this?
No, you're doing it.
Okay. So the hedges are getting less dense, and thus sort of almost encouraging kids from one house to go to visit kids at another house.
And one of the ways these houses were marketed in Holland Hills, which sold very well from the get-go, was through these gorgeous renderings provided by Goodman's office. And you see the deep shade created by the long overhangs, the deep shade that protects the windows, which are floor to ceiling, and it's clearly set within a wooded landscape. There you see the actual Type 2 house in its setting, and here you see the floor plan.
And with the plan, it's important, again, to notice this open plan starting to dissolve the rooms. Hadn't happened yet completely, but the living, dining together, starting to be more connected to the kitchen. Also really important to notice this entrance coming in. I'm going to be jumping all over slides here. You see the entrance here, the same material on the outside extending to the inside. And so really reinforcing this notion that's created by these windows. You see these window walls on both sides, so you approach the house,
Okay, we can
and you're pretty much seeing through the house. It becomes a transparent structure. The fireplace set apart as another one of those kind of architectonic elements, along with that what I call a great roof. You see on the inside how present the outside is. You see the fireplace on the left-hand slide with the wood box right there at the entrance. The material of the exterior coming into the interior.
And furthermore, as I mentioned before, this neighborhood is punctuated by public parks that are managed by the neighborhoods. And this was covered in an article in the Washington Post saying, do you want to live longer? Live near more green spaces. This is true, of course, in Reston as well as Holland Hills and Highland Hills. We'll talk about it in a minute. Another aspect of the community that was really important was summarized by Michael Sorkin, who said, Holland Hills is one of the truly happy experiments in modernity. A beautiful place of social activism, love of nature, and potluck picnics. And you see, one of the crews that's out there to protect that neighborhood park, or one of the neighborhood parks. And, this is my baby too. Holland Hills, one of the coolest stories we learned in last week's symposium was this woman who has lived forever in her Holland Hills house maintains her Barney Voigt landscape plan, which she marks in red as she continues to complete the elements in that original landscape plan.
When you purchased a home in Holland Hills, the landscape plan was part of the purchase. Right, and so by Barney Voigt, or by Dan Kiley or whoever, you would get this plan, but it wouldn't all be planted. And so it's really wonderful that you think about this kind of invitation to participate in your property. You're not just buying it, made whole. you're buying it with, it needs you. And so over time, you can see on that drawing where she's marked in what she's planted and what she hasn't. So here we are, here at Holland Hills. This is right at the edge. The house on the right is part of a neighboring development, not part of Holland Hills. The Holland Hills house on the left. One, you can see right away that there are a lot more trees. Two, you see the driveway on the right? It cuts through the property, goes all the way to the back of the property. So you're bringing your car all the way, a long way from the street. As opposed to the Holland Hills house, you simply have a driveway. Sometimes they're carports, but they're usually very close to the street. And so preserving the property that the house is on for the users of the house.
Now we're moving to Richmond, to Chesterfield County, Bon Air, where we introduce Goodman's contract with National Homes, which was the biggest manufacturer of prefabricated houses in this country. Headquartered in Lafayette, Indiana, they hired Goodman to design their first modern houses. And Goodman used all of the technical information he had learned about modular housing, oddly, by working for the U.S. government, and he applies it to this catalog of National Homes houses. This little neighborhood in Bon Air, Richmond, is roughly 75 houses, and the typical house, believe it or not, is very close to a Type 2 Holland Hills house. Most of the houses in Highland Hills, it's very difficult to separate those two. Highland Hills and Bon Air have carports that were either used for cars or for covered outdoor patios.
But you can also see in the site plan, the house is the same as in Holland Hills, not parallel to the street, for all the same reasons. And again, within the covenants, no fences allowed.
And here we see the catalog with which National Homes sold these houses to franchisees like the Sauer brothers in Bon Air, Virginia. They sold these to franchisees across the country. And we see the images on this Life magazine, in this Life magazine advertisement, where the mom is coming home from work in 1950, and her husband has planned a surprise birthday party for her. And she comes in all dressed in her suit, and she shows her guests, after they've had a cocktail in the living room with the full height windows, which you see in the picture. She shows them her cool, ceramic tile bathroom and all the cool electrical appliances, and her house is air conditioned, if it's a pacemaker. You could choose to get an air conditioned house. This is the interior and the exterior of one of those houses. If you've been to Holland Hills, or Hammond Wood, or Rock Creek Park. You will recognize this house type. It looks like a Goodman house. Very simple roof form. This one's been expanded. One of the advantages of a Goodman house, you usually have very simple roof forms, so they were easy to expand. When you had two children and then whoops, the third one arrived, you could expand your house very easily because of the simple forms. This was 1953 to 1957. Same time Holland Hills is being developed, and other subdivisions in Montgomery County, Maryland. Here's another image of an ad, one of the ads that popularized National Homes. And you see they brag in the ads, I'm sorry it's so pixelated, but it was architect-designed house that you could build in less than 2 weeks. If you had a slab on grade, you could erect that house in less than 2 weeks, and you moved in, and you got a house for $12,000 or $14,000. Architect design, Charles Goodman, AIA. Yes, ma'am.
They say architect design, but I wonder what at that time was the alternative. You showed us the homes prior, and I just wonder, why weren't more homes architect designed?
It's very expensive.
Same reason as now. There's a certain stigma about that being a lot more expensive, and often is. There's reason for the stereotype, but I think that most homes in those earlier developments we showed were designed in a contractor's office. And they were, when a contractor designs a home, he's thinking a lot more about how to do it inexpensively, right? And how to increase the profit margin, whereas an architect is trained to make nice spaces.
That makes a lot of sense.
Much more expensive, at least 10%, because that's what you've got to pay the architect. In Highland Hills, this was from the Richmond paper. The paper had an article saying, this neighborhood with the curving streets and the many more trees and the natural landscape, it may be a happier place to live. Children will be safer because of the curving streets will slow down traffic. The picture window will have a view. The patio will have a breeze. No, this is going to be a better place for you to live. And now, whoosh,
Now,
we change completely.
we go,
thank God
we go
this is
into the
yours.
district here.
Okay.
And now we're at Rock Creek Park. It's an urban development.
No, River Park.
River Park. It's an urban development. Obviously, they're not curving streets here because this is a city block.
In Southwest Washington.
In Southwest, yeah. And so it's a collection of single-family attached homes and high-rise or mid-rise development. And so this was one of the reasons that Robert Simon selected Charles Goodman to do the Hickory Clusters. But you can also see that the cars are pretty much at the outside of the development in order to preserve a pedestrian way on the inside of the development. So similar principles of not having the car be dominant in the place, and still concerned about how do you make the house part of the land or part of the landscape.
And here, has anybody here been to River Park? You have? Yeah, just a couple of people. I mean, it's remarkable.
It was developed with Reynolds Aluminum they were the client, and so the houses were meant to showcase aluminum products. You see the screens on let's see if I can do this without these screens. All the framing, the mullions are all aluminum. So obviously everywhere they could. This was sort of after the Reynolds Metals headquarters was developed in Richmond, where it also was developed as a showcase for aluminum. They hired Isamo Noguchi to design ashtrays. The carpet in the building had aluminum fiber in it. All the file cabinets were aluminum. All the desks were aluminum. So in all of these cases, right after the war, Reynolds Metals is looking for new markets. And they're starting to develop projects like this that showcase their project.
But it's not only showcasing aluminum, it was still creating a beautiful landscape setting in which these townhouses and the mid-rise building were located.
You can also, again, see here the prevalence of the landscaping. The slide on the right, the trees are still fairly young, and it's a lush landscape now. And the ones on the left, there's obviously a concern about making outdoor spaces where people can be. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Did aluminum housing catch on? I mean,
It didn't catch on.
I'm unaware of
That's a
that.
really great question.
Right.
Because
It did not.
there's an aluminum house at Holland Hills that was designed by Alcoa, right?
For Alcoa.
For Alcoa. And I
And
think
there's one in Richmond.
and something like 35 of them were built around the country as models to hopefully, spring that market forward, and it didn't work. And I think part of that is because you make a house out of an aluminum, you can't go to the local, lumber store and buy parts for it. If you want to adjust something, if you want to add on to it, you're all of a sudden tied into this somewhat closed system, and therefore, it would be a hard sell for the person who wants to take care of their house.
Harder to expand, harder to fix, to
Yes.
maintain.
So, River Park has aluminum accents. It is not constructed out of aluminum. Okay, if you go back to the picture there.
Yeah, please, thank you.
Yeah. So, all the storefronts, okay, that's perfect. All the storefronts you see there, the two horizontal beams,
Yeah.
they're all aluminum. The grillage, as we call it, that's aluminum. The stairs are aluminum. There's a handful of balconies are aluminum, but everything else is traditional.
Okay, tell us this. Do you know what we were told? We've heard several different stories about the vaults. Are they aluminum?
One is there's two different types. One are actually is precast concrete.
Okay,
The other is actually tongue roof.
thank you. That's
Yeah.
good to know.
Right, so it ended up being a little more ornamental than structural,
Yeah,
so to
100%
speak.
ornamental. Okay,
Yeah.
except for the window blinds. Okay.
Right. It was an experiment that didn't proliferate, let's say. But nonetheless, Robert E. Simon Jr. saw River Park and said, we're going to get him for Reston. We're going to get Goodman because he understands cluster housing, or I think he's one of my guys to help create Reston Village at Lake Ann. And Robert E. Simon Jr. was a New Yorker whose family had a very successful real estate company whose crown jewel was Carnegie Hall. Simon sold his shares of Carnegie Hall in order to fund his purchase of land in Reston in order to avoid a tax problem from that capital gains. He purchases a majority of the land that became Reston at that time and begins to develop Lake Ann Village, all of a part. And here you see on the left an aerial photograph that shows Lake Ann Plaza.
Oops.
Oh,
But you guys know this place.
you can get yourself oriented in this aerial. And then the Hickory Cluster, there are 3 Hickory Clusters, blocks that were numbered 1, 2, and 3. I don't think that's chronological, but this happens to show Hickory Cluster number 3 in the left foreground. Robert Simon had 7 goals for Reston that were very idealistic, that meshed with Goodman's ideals. One, that there would be leisure time for the residents and that they could find that leisure time near their houses. They could go to Lake Ann, they could go to a pool or a tennis court, they could walk through the woods. He would provide housing for people of all ages and of all types, all races. He wanted this Reston to be economically diverse, where the janitor and the company CEO could both live. He wanted people to be able to live, work, and play in the same community, and that there would be amenities that were both cultural, here we are, and recreational. He wanted beauty created by the preservation of the natural setting as well as by high-quality architectural design. In fact, the electrical service from the beginning was underground, and as his final goal, he wanted financial success for the community. And we're not going to get into the financial success as enjoyed by Simon, but we'll move on with Hickory Cluster, and here's the plan showing the 3 blocks of housing that comprised Hickory Cluster.
And you can, I think it's important to note the connection of the buildings to the land. And you see, it's not solid blocks of buildings. The buildings almost start fragmenting into the landscape. You've got the landscape that's created by the 3 blocks. You've also got the landscape, a different kind of landscape that's created by the massing of the houses. So you've got this central area created by the 3 blocks. You've got each of these, and then once you go into the house, you've got roof terraces and you've got outdoor terraces that, again, are reconnecting you once you've gone inside. So it's kind of like at each scale, Goodman is reestablishing or reinforcing that connection to the landscape.
And this aerial shows Block 3 of Hickory Cluster and how Goodman worked very hard to conceal cars on the site of this cluster particularly. He built an underground parking garage that was covered with a plaza. This was designed by Dan Kiley, I believe. Although sources differ on who the landscape architect was. But these are very formal plazas. The intent was the cars would not be a dominant presence. Unfortunately, that concrete plaza that you see back here,
Which was above the parking.
which covered the parking, the concrete dissolved or leaked,
Yeah, it was defective in its construction and torn down, demolished.
and therefore that plaza had to be demolished. It was a great idea. We're going to go through these really fast. Here are some of the unit plans. There were 12 different types of unit plans at Hickory Cluster. Here's an image that shows, the larger landscape, the private landscape flowing into the public landscape in a private terrace.
So you can see with this, the 3 floors, you get these 3 different experiences of the external environment. One, the terrace, you're in your own private outdoors. Second floor, you've got big windows that take you to the outside, and third floor, you've got this terrace which allows you to get back outside again.
Did they have basements?
I think the ones we were in were built into the hillside, so you come in at one level, go down, but you can go out to grade at that level.
Okay, interesting.
Here's a pencil rendering on the left and a typical Hickory Cluster interior on the right, where you see, again, the living and dining areas blended together and open to the kitchen, which is open to the outdoors.
But still maintaining that transparency that you saw in Holland Hills, you saw in Highland Hills, you see throughout his work.
And another thing I liked about this picture on the right was that it shows the open tread stairs. Let's go back to Army Airport Transport, at National Airport, the open risers you see here, the Hickory Cluster. Why Goodman? Why do we care? Because he developed economies of mean space, site development, and materials that were widely available to anybody, unlike, Mimi Sadler, whose house you wouldn't be able to touch. He developed programs for housing that were widely available to middle-class people. He systemized the organic. He connected communities to nature with his architecture, the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the land planning, the curved roads, the forested settings, the maintenance of trees in the landscape.
Well, and he was also an innovator. Again, the aluminum products at River Park, the air conditioning system here. I don't know that he was the inventor of that system, but he certainly was, part of its conception and
you all know about RELAC, right?
Yeah.
Or you?
Is it not working?
It's not working.
Okay.
Oh, rats.
It's a good idea. Let's just.
Absolutely.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. And essentially, it's an early version of geothermal cooling, right? And obviously, early in that development, you're going to have problems. But I think it foresaw something that's now a really common installation in residential construction.
And he developed the the prefab houses that truly were available to most middle-class families, that would be quick to build and economical to build.
Yeah, and they literally, I mean, the wall panels arrived at the site on a truck. They essentially, all the framing could be done in a day on site.
And finally, I insist on using this word. Goodman truly created modern utopian communities. Did that utopia endure? Has it been perfect? Has it been close to perfect? Maybe not. But he had ideas that would create a utopia, that sought ideals. And he worked with developers who shared his ideals, and therefore they could be realized. Whether Simon here or our pal Davenport in Holland Hills, or the sweet little Chesterfield developers in Bon Air who did Highland Hills, they created communities that sought to work together, that sought to fulfill ideals. And here we see Hickory Cluster on the left side and Holland Hills, a house in Holland Hills on the right.
But it is interesting to see when you look at these from aerial views, any of his developments, when you see the aerial views, they are these kind of oases of green among much denser, much less forested spaces.
Thank you guys for coming tonight.
Thanks.
We have loved looking at you.
Are there other questions that you guys have? Yes. Yeah.
I was curious, what's the difference between a prefab house and like a Sears house?
Well, a Sears house was they call them package houses. There was no prefabrication off-site. They arrived as all the pieces you needed, and then were framed and roofed and filled in at the site. As opposed to a prefab house can be anything from something like a mobile home, where the entire house is made in a factory, to what are called flat pack houses, where the walls are all made as panels with or without interior finishes, and are brought to the site laying flat on a flatbed truck and lifted with a crane, set into place, put together. They can go up much faster than the stick house of the Sears package. Obviously not as, the mobile home comes pre-manufactured, so it's whole when it gets there. So it's kind of grades along a continuum there. You had a question?
What was Philip Johnson's connection to this type of architecture? Was he greatly influenced by it? Did he train with these people? Or?
Not that I know of.
He built this glass house. And
Yes.
It just reflects all this.
Well, and the house,
No pun intended.
I think the house that really inspired the glass house was Mies van der Rohe's Farnsworth house. That was the original glass house, and I think in that sense, Mies van der Rohe had much more of an impact on Goodman than Johnson would have.
But Johnson followed this here, or was contemporary?
Johnson was somewhat of a contemporary. I'm not sure when Johnson was born, but Johnson was following Mies, as was Goodman.
Okay.
Yeah. Johnson went to the perfect object route, and Goodman went to the what is called merchant housing route. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
At the time, I'm thinking about someone living in a property now, but at the time, what were some of the I guess, shortcomings of his designs in the homes that
Goodman
you
design?
observed?
Well, we understand that some of these houses were pretty chilly because of the floor to ceiling windows. But I can tell you that while Goodman was designing the houses in Holland Hills, he was developing these economical prototypes for national homes. And those panels, the prefab wall panels and roof panels for Highland Hills and other National Homes communities were insulated and the windows were thermal.
And they had radiant floors.
And you had the option of radiant floors.
Yeah.
Which is amazing
Yeah,
at that
I think
time. And the fact
1950,
that you
that didn't
had
happen
options in the 50s for air conditioning.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't see air conditioning in my house till the 80s. No, but anyway, so his systemization allowed evolution. So he continued to add advances to glazing, to wall insulation, roof insulation.
In Highland Hills in Richmond, a number of the houses were sided with masonry, which, unfortunately we found out as a really horrible building material, as an exterior material. And so those have, either are painted very regularly or they've been replaced.
Yes, ma'am.
So I grew up in Holland Hills, as I think you all know, and I have to say that the one thing about the houses is that the bathrooms were minute, the closets were minute, the kitchen was even minute, and that has unfortunately over the years led to a lot of people in Holland Hills adding onto their house. Creating more space, because today we live differently than we did back then.
Exactly, and that's I think that wasn't. I don't think he was scrimping as much as that was the standard.
That was the standard,
Yeah.
right? And we didn't think anything at the time. We
Right.
didn't say, "Oh, we have a tiny
Right.
closet."
Yeah.
It's only retrospectively that we think. Those
Right, but it
closets
does
were.
result in the modification. But I think Goodman anticipated modification. Again, with the simple roof forms. Yes, sorry. We know you know a lot, right? About RELAC and about the houses.
No, seriously, I was wondering if there's any information about why Simon didn't employ Goodman in more of this area, and just did the Hickory Cluster stuff.
Well, Mr. Simon unfortunately was not around very long.
Well, I understand.
Right? And so I think he was trying to get the entire core of the community built at once, so that when people moved in, the infrastructure would be there. It wouldn't be that you were waiting for the pool or the tennis courts to be finished. He wanted everything done. And I think as a result, divided those labors among a variety of architects.
And as you said, Simon was ousted in 67
4 years after.
Yeah.
because he didn't sell enough houses, because people were not buying houses that modern. Hickory Cluster was radical, even compared to Holland Hills houses.
And as a result, when Gulf Oil took over the operation of Reston, when the newer housing started having much more traditional features and sold a lot better.
Right, Gulf made sales its primary goal and succeeded.
Yeah.
I noticed that at Holland Hills, they had one bathroom in the house. Is that true?
If you had a one-level house, yeah, there was one bathroom for everyone.
Right, the Type 2 house had one bathroom.
Absolutely.
And again, I think that was the norm.
One small bathroom.
One small bathroom. If it was a two-level house, there was one upstairs and one downstairs, but they were, really tiny.
Bathrooms weren't leisure centers.
No. No sunken tubs, no.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Among the neighborhoods you shared, how many of them are on the National Register of Historic Places?
That's a great question.
Well, thanks to Shelley's work, thanks to some work that I helped with in Richmond, thanks to Montgomery County, Maryland, a lot of these neighborhoods are listed. Holland Hills, a bunch of the Montgomery County, Maryland neighborhoods are now listed as part of what's called a multi-property district. Highland Hills in Richmond is eligible for listing. People are more and more aware of Goodman's importance in architecture. So
but also becoming more and more aware of or overcoming the myths about designation. That nobody's going to tell you what to do unless you want to get investment tax credits. And so it's one of those things where if you want to take advantage of those credits, then you have to work within certain standards.
Walnut, no, I did it. Hickory Cluster could be listed on the National Register.
Yeah.
If there was, if the community wanted to advance that cause, because it is eminently eligible for listing. And all it takes is money and work and sweat. Right. Just a little bit. Thank you, guys.
Oh, one more question.
Oh,
I'm just wondering, these houses are small,
Mhm.
and I'm just wondering if people have these houses that work in Washington, and then they have their second house, big house in Middleburg.
They might. I don't know.
I think they just expand.
Yeah, there have been a lot of additions in Holland Hills. Some very successful, some less so. And that's just the notion of change. And in Holland Hills, on one hand, originally it was it was clearly a community that was built at a similar time. And now you start seeing these anomalies come up as current architects interpret things differently. Yeah.
So in Reston we have covenants. So in Holland Hills, you're talking about some of the additions were successful, and some were could people basically do whatever they wanted.
There is an architecture review committee.
There's
within the
always been an
neighborhood.
architecture review committee of the neighborhood, and as we all know, those committees, it depends on who sits on the committee, the review committee. Now Holland Hills is a Fairfax County historic district, and so Fairfax County has its review board on top of the local review board. But again, as someone who has served on those review committees, it all depends on who's on the commission and what are they concerned about, But it does help protect the architectural integrity of the community, and those historic district overlays are only placed, or most often, at least in Richmond, they are only placed on local review committees if the community says, "Oh, we've got to have this. We want to preserve the nature and character of our neighborhood."
Well, that you would think would be the goal.
Yeah, you would hope.
You would hope.
Okay.
Well, thank you
very
so
much.
much.